and welcome to Wait, It Gets Better, the improvisational storytelling podcast, where every week a few friends get together with our ideas and we combine those ideas, sharing them like a kid shares toys on a playground, and we create a better society. I am, of course, Levi,
I'm Reed.
And I'm Seth.
and we are here to tell you a story. Should I give the synopsis from previous episode? What we're building on?
Sure.
Do it.
All right. So, there's a couple of different things happening from the previous episode. There was a mining colony that kind of lost contact with the sort of home base or whatever, and they were kind of working their own way. By mining colony, I mean like on another planet. They were quickly running out of resources, and I think Reed, you'd said been about 90 years.
Yep.
And there was sort of certain irreplaceable things were going offline, and they were having to kind of make do with what they had, and just I think you said they were like using the laser cutter to like cut blocks for building eventually once all the power goes out, like
Yeah.
just trying to do a lot of prep work.
Yeah. The high tech mining tools that were dependent on technology, as parts that couldn't be replaced wore out, stuff like that.
Right, right. That was yours. That was the history. I had genre, which was murder mystery. And I think that I had determined that someone basically finally came to the colony, and it was an auditor. And he was sort of auditing this company and found out that they had kind of a unused asset that hadn't received any attention in a couple of decades. So he was kind of dispatched out to sort of see what was going on,
Yeah.
to kind of look about what's going on. And so he kind of comes in, and maybe there's some internal issue. Maybe there's some internal reason in the colony, that why sort of the bigger corporation that was originally sending them resources and funding them just kind of packed up and left all these people on this remote planet. It's kind of like a murder mystery, like, why were you guys left here to die kind of thing. And then Seth's was something based on a book you're reading. I think he was reading a lit RPG book, which is centered around the idea of writing about people who play in like super virtual reality video games. So like a lot of it has to do with the fact that a person would go into these games, and then the kind of crazy escapes that they experience in the games. But then the writer always refers back to the fact that the character has stats and hit points and experience and friends lists. So it's like the idea that you're in a video game is kind of always before you. But I promised that I would start listening to one of those stories, and I did. I listened to The Edge of Reality, the first book in the Phantom Server series, and I thought it was good. And I kind of have a little bit more of an idea, I think, of what Seth wanted to get across. So we just have to introduce elements of that into the story. So what elements did you guys have for this week?
I have Ka-Tet members.
I have Antihero.
And I have Villain. So should we introduce some? Reed, do you want to go first? Ka-Tet members?
Cool. Okay. The first one is Jim, and they refer to him as Jim the Mason, because you got to understand there's not that many people here.
Right.
And so, but there's enough now, as it's been a few generations, like, oh yeah, they recognize Jim. Yeah, which one? Oh, the one that's the stonemason. Oh yeah, him. And now the new generation, Jim the Mason, just now is called by these two guys that he's connected up with. They just call him Mason.
Right.
And these, so he's Jim 60, and the two other members of the Ka-Tet are Shepard and Smith, and they just go. This generation just has begun just naming themselves based on their craft, because they realize they're on their own, and they have to function.
Right.
And they're now Mason is 60. He was, you know, the last contact had been 30 years when he was born. So his parents remembered and grandparents remembered, the way it was that they had come from, uh, a highly technological society for the purpose of mining these particularly rich asteroid belt.
Yeah.
And it had the advantage of having this planet close by that was, Earth-like, with temperate climate. They could set up shop, so to speak. And the original crew, besides the miners, of course, they had sent along people specifically to kind of transition into a semi-permanent habitation. Like, for example, there were, the biologists, the botanists, and the animal husbandry people, to catalog the local flora and fauna, see what was suitable for food, what were, was there anything on the planet that was growing indigenously that could be
Right.
nutritious,
Right.
any of the animals that were domesticatable. Um, and it had been some generations now. Shepherd, as he comes from a line they had been working with specifically, a kind of it was a herd beast that good for good for meat, but he has been working specifically to raise up to breed animals that could be used for draft purposes.
Right.
And and Smith comes from a line of, a lot of metallurgists, and miners, but the engineering kind of crowd. His background is, uh, you know, metal fabrication, metallurgy. And
Right.
then as things wear out, going, a little more old school, as far as having to forge replacement parts. Cannibalizing, could only take you so far. You sometimes have to just build a part to replace one that's worn out. And, and so he has stepped into that. Mason got acquainted with Smith specifically because he was recognizing that the laser cutters were becoming less and less efficient, taking more and more power, and then their power cells were recharging less and less efficiently. And it was just a matter of time before they were going to have to figure other ways for shaping uh, their building materials.
Right.
And so he's been working with Smith to just design and fabricate tools that, where they could get the job done. And they're, they kind of, because they have this real close history of super high technology, you know, that they're coming together, Ka-Tet, that I first became aware of it in uh, the Gunslinger, the Dark Tower series by, come on,
Stephen King.
Stephen King, right? Where, Ka being kind of like destiny, and the Ka-Tet was like, in that case there were three people that kind of came together. I don't suppose it's necessarily three, isn't this game? But it just they were just drawn together. Like I said, Mason began working with Smith, and the other thing that was really troubling Mason is that the hover sleds were giving out. In other words, the means of transporting the stones from the quarries
Right.
were dependent on these high tech hovercraft that could skim. They didn't have wheels, so they could traverse rough ground. But it was just a matter of time before the more and more they were dropping out of service, and people had begun using kind of like makeshift carts. They laugh about inventing the wheel, but yeah, it's a real thing. Keeping everything going while you transition. And Mason particularly remembers that had been kind of a huge split in the community of those that were geared toward, well, we are going to be in contact eventually whenever the people back home figure out what it is that's disrupted things in such a way that they haven't been in contact with. It's just a matter of time. Where the other group was like, you know what, it's time for us to just recognize we're on our own and we're going to have to make this work. And Mason comes from that tradition, and Shepard and Smith also do. And uh, so,
I have this kind of picture in my mind, right? In order to fund a expedition out to this asteroid belt to get these rare minerals,
right,
You know, a corporation can't just do it itself, right? So what does it do? It contacts a university,
Right.
right? And gets them to get a grant from the government to go and discover the flora and fauna, right? It
Right. So
contacts another university and gets them to send a bunch of geologists to study, so Shepard, Mason, and Smith are all kind of experts in their field and sort of descendants of their their grandparents were like scientists.
scientists, academics,
Yeah.
and now they find,
Now and then
they get their hands dirty.
then their parents had to kind of do stuff, but they still did stuff in their speciality range.
Right.
And then now they are less scientists and more just straight industry workers.
Craftsmen.
Yeah,
Yeah. Right.
that's interesting. In the vein of what Seth was talking about last week with the something based on the book you're reading, I think one of the cool ideas would be if, especially from the um hero or this main person, this auditor, from his perspective, he's an auditor, right? He's used to sort of turning everything into numbers and stats and statistics.
Hmm.
So he kind of comes in and his view of the whole thing is like Seth was talking about, like video games set up with like, oh, here's this person. As I talk to him, I get a detailed information about his service record, and I determine that his sort of all around skill level is 25. And I have proven that my skill level's 35 because of the things I've done. It's like, oh, he's very good at convincing people, and he like just kind of automatically assigns these sort of numeric values to people.
Right.
Does that fulfill your original story element, Seth?
Yeah, I think something along that lines, and I think maybe because with let's see, because he's, let's say, another almost 100 years past them and their technology
Yeah.
as they're deteriorating. Like, I think that some of that would be almost an automatic,
Right.
like especially in an age like that where you have. And I'm thinking back to, like, because I think we mentioned one of the other ones, kind of like I don't know if it was like this a whole lot, but systems like on the Ender's Game, Jane, is it Jane?
Yeah. The
There,
AI.
yeah, the AI that's connected to the net, and it's always scanning everything, referencing it back against, all the other information that's plugged into the system.
Yeah.
Um, and in something like that, it would be like constantly, let's say, fed, to them, analyzing, the health of an individual they're talking to, like you said, assessing their skill level based on, as it starts getting information on something they've done, analyzing their speech pattern, their
Right.
interaction,
Right.
and adjusting everybody's, let's say, level in a certain thing. Whereas maybe the people here don't quite have that because all of that is kind of deteriorated. For now, he's come in and he has all of that.
Right. And
Um,
that would definitely be one of, maybe even one of his big downfalls at the beginning, is that he sort of is used to being so connected like everyone else is, and is used to having all this data streamed to him, that these people aren't as connected as he is, and therefore he makes assumptions based about who they are or based about who their grandparents were, and therefore says, oh, because you're the descendant of this such and such scientist and we kind of knew about them, I can just assume that. And so at first people hate him because he is crass, because he expects people to treat him like what his declared level is,
Yeah.
but no one else has any of that kind of idea. So this is kind of like you know, it's a really valuable thing, but he is so used to operating in it and in it only, kind of like how the Aes Sedais in the Wheel of Time, the women Aes Sedais can detect each other's ability to channel, and they kind of like put themselves in a subservient role underneath people who
Yeah.
can channel more than them. And then you have like the wise ones come in who like don't care about that at all.
Yeah. They determine value based on other criteria.
Right. And so he is used to value being based on like this sort of automatic detection of what I've accomplished versus what you've accomplished. But these people have been outside of that for so long that it just doesn't it just doesn't equate anymore.
Right.
Um, Seth, do you want to do the anti-hero or should I talk about the villain?
Sure. Well, we're on this topic. I'll bring in anti-hero.
Okay, great.
The anti-hero, I'll give the name Ren. They, I think, like Shepard and Mason and Smith,
Right.
is a descendant of one of these scientists that would have come here, do a lot of the cataloging
Yeah.
of
Yeah.
all of the stuff. And whereas the other people have kind of moved into other professions, um, as some of the things were going kind of deteriorating, they were able to put almost like a bit of it mismatched together with some of the ability for the like detection and cataloging of everything.
Okay.
And so they have, as far as anything in this, let's say this planet, they have one of the most advanced systems. It's not quite like what our auditor has,
Right.
because they've kind of jerry rigged it together to, be almost not cyborg like it's attached to them, but they've taken bits and pieces of things that have functioned
Right.
in certain ways, found different ways to power or power certain parts of them so that they can still catalog plants. Because now that they're not really connected, they have now, because before you could just put in data, right?
Right.
And you'd get all the answers you needed from, the central web, right?
Right. Right. Right.
Um, Whereas now with that disconnected, I would say Ren's family or their father and grandfather would have then started reassembling all of the information about the planet, like all of the things, keeping track of everything that they can then get, scan, and basically remaking a different server that's
Right.
almost like a library, but still connected to almost like them having the access to it. So people will come and like get information about like a new plant or certain plants or mixtures or chemistry things
Yeah.
that they have, or they seek out people to bring them, different alloys or materials that they want to figure out what an alloy of it might make or what some
Okay.
of its properties, because they can like scan, run tests, and figure that out and catalog it. And so they're fairly isolationist, like up in their own little kind of corner of the world, and don't really like to leave that.
Right.
But as far as information on anything planet side, they have a much easier access to everything that they've been cataloging information wise for the planet for the last, 90 years.
Great. So they can be people can go to them, but they're sort of creating their own sort of library of information.
Correct.
Cool. So I'll just jump into the villain. He's not really super connected to any of these. The uh how do I say this? We discovered a way to sort of remote prospect asteroids and planets a long time ago. You could kind of send out a sort of frequency, kind of like from a tuning fork from a place centrally located, and it would kind of move out at, about half the speed of light. So it took a while to get to some places, but, with being able to go faster and faster, it didn't be it became kind of a thing that we could do. Um, there was a one of the moons of Jupiter when we were sort of first experimenting with this sort of prospecting method. What you do is you then observe the planets or the asteroids, and then they vibrate at different frequencies, and you can then sort of like take measurements and then have a pretty good idea about what is on those planets.
Yeah, like if an asteroid has a iron nickel core, it's going to behave differently than
Right,
one that's mostly ice.
right, and we can look at that and see it, and then be like, oh, okay, that means that it's worth traveling 10 years out of our way to get to this place because there's a ton of titanium there, or there's a ton of whatever there.
Right.
One of the planets, when we sent this out, began to vibrate, and it didn't stop vibrating. for like 2 years, and uh, um, Edward Cage, sort of CEO, head grip on the sort of most of the out of the solar system mining operations, funded a expedition and was able to sweep aside everyone's sort of irritation that he was going to be doing mining the on the planet, the national park planets, right? Our solar system was supposed to stay untouched by mining,
Yeah.
right? But he was able to, of course, pay or bail out the Federation of the World, and he was able to mine this very unique ore. And with this unique ore, we accrued several things. We accrued we got room temperature superconductivity, so you could conduct electricity without any resistance at room temperature, and then able to be manipulated even more to create super do like extra conductivity at room temperature, where it could actually sort of travel faster than the speed of light. Anyways, he mined half of this moon out and was making just sort of untold riches, like quadrillions of space credits. And
Richie Rich Rich.
yeah,
Scrooge
and
McDuck Rich.
yeah,
Okay.
and a small corporation that was kind of holding on, uh, based mostly in its ability to sort of pivot really easily, which the Cage Corporation couldn't do because they were so large. They could pivot very easily into different things, and so they were staying afloat and paying their people good money and making a profit. They had just gotten information back about this asteroid belt, which once the sort of prospecting wave hit it, it was still vibrating, and the information we got back was like 200 years, right?
Mhm.
It's like this thing will vibrate for 200 years, which means that the purity of the asteroid materials were magnitudes higher than whatever the Cage Corporation had gotten off of this moon. So they got together a small group, funding through universities and other prospecting groups, and had sent out a small expeditionary force to set up a colony on the planet and to begin to mine this material on the asteroid belt. And they probably wouldn't see any benefit for around 100 years. When the first sort of data bursts came back, Cage, of course, heard about it and then promptly leaned in, forced this small corporation out of business, purchased all of their assets, and then scrubbed all of the further communication.
Okay.
Basically saying, we're done. We're just gonna those people in the asteroid belts way over there, we're done. Now Cage was an old man at this point in time, and people live to be old. I mean, you think he was like 150 years old at this point. And so he paid an enormous sum of money to have himself digitized, a computer that could hold his brain created and digitized, so that he could go on being the CEO and ruler of Cage Corporation for the rest of, till the heat death of the universe. But there wasn't, the sophistication of the computers weren't there. So what they did was they beamed his neural net to Jupiter, where the other Cage facility was. It takes about 2 hours for it to get from Earth to Jupiter, and then they basically just have a transport station that just sends it back. So his neural net is on like a 12-minute delay constantly as they're trying to build a machine that can hold his consciousness. So this has been going on for about 80 years or so, which accounts for one of the reasons why an auditor was dispatched, because now Cage's great grandchildren are kind of running the show, while their grandfather only has probably about like 5 or 10 minutes of like conscious decision making ability every day or so, because his consciousness is just in this constant stream back and forth, because it's too much data for them to store in one place, and they're building a computer, but it's still like a couple hundred years away from being completed, so it's just like this giant mess, and that is the villain.
This is cool.
Yeah.
So how did the auditor, who was it, this like his kids kind of like trying to pick up the reins and
Yep.
him trying to keep
Yep.
hold of the reins and
As bureaucracy goes, things just tend to get, bigger and, more convoluted. So, a couple of years ago, one of his grandsons or sons was kind of going through stuff, noticed there was this purchase, and then noticed that no one had ever followed up on that place, and therefore just dispatched an auditor to see what was going on, And you can't ask dad or grandpa about it, because he comes in and it takes him like a minute or so to like be conscious of what's going on, and then they ask him like the big question, yes or no to this thing, and he says yes or no, and then he's gone again.
wow.
And it's like, well, in a couple hundred years we'll be able to like, they're like, well, in 50 years we'll be able to hold him here for 2 hours, and then in like a couple hundred years we'll be able to use this material, you know for instant communication, for quantum computing, for much higher data storage. And what's so silly is that if Cage had just continued the asteroid, just purchased and continued the asteroid, they'd probably have the materials now to for him to be like a full computer boy now,
Yeah,
you know. But he kind of doomed himself by being selfish and overreaching.
yeah.
But that is a thing that the no one knows, because he made sort of a reactionary, spiteful decision to purchase the smaller corporation and just kind of put them out of business and forget about that sort of stockpile of this material.
So in our story now, the auditor from the Corporation has made contact, and I
Yeah,
suppose that his first contact would be Ren,
yeah,
right?
the record keeper basically.
Right, and then it's to you know figure out what everybody else is doing and what's going on and what is the status of the mining operation, and
Right,
is there stockpile material ready to be shipped? Uh, you know, the of course they were out of fuel. They could no longer. They're not traveling back and forth anymore. They can't. They for a couple of decades they were able to keep crews working, but with no shipments being made, people said, I want to focus my energies on, getting my life together and seeing
right,
that my family is going to be taken care of. I don't want to be working on a project that's going to potentially give me wealth in a society that hasn't had contact with us for
right.
decades.
And especially if the sort of corporation headquarters on the planet, like, they ran out of money like years ago to
Yeah,
pay people anything.
yeah.
So the economy is kind of shifted away from, international space dollars to something else. It could be this material. It could be
Hmm.
this material that they use, because what I can also imagine is that this material is, if we want to connect it to one of our older stories, that's fine, but kind of like magic space material.
Yeah,
You know, it's less, this is what it does, and more so, what do you need it to do?
yeah.
You can find a way to sort of turn it into whatever you need it to do. You want to etch it and turn it into a board. Well, it conducts electricity very well. You want to turn it into a fuse. Well, you got to shave it this thin and then put it in between the things, and it'll be a fuse. You know, you want to, make glasses out of it. Oh yeah, well, you etch it in that specific way, and then it can take information really interesting and make, replacement glasses. And in the same way, oh, never mind, you guys won't get that. It's like they're really rich because they have this crazy material, but it to them it's worth not that much. I mean, it's great. You know, they can fix a lot of their stuff
Yeah.
with it, but
Riches is relative, though. If you're the stocks of the food that the basic supplies stopped coming, and you've
right,
had to really focus on making sure that we're growing enough stuff so people's nutrition
right,
is being kept up.
exactly.
And it becomes who is important shifts. The super tech guys uh, take a back seat to the guy that's going to be showing up with the food.
Right, right.
And then the ruling council, like the corporate hierarchy, like you say, why am I listening to a boss that doesn't have anything to do with what I do day to day?
Right. Part of what I was thinking was as well is there are people on the planet who are descendants of people who were really who were either employed by Cage or, who are because our hero comes to the planet to solve a murder mystery.
Yeah.
Why are all these people dead?
Right.
Right? And then he comes down through the clouds and finds them all alive.
Yeah.
And then it becomes an even bigger mystery, you know? Well,
I
why?
have a
What's up?
I have a slight idea
Okay.
as to why, where the auditor might be coming from, how some of it might have disappeared. So the smaller company, they somehow got the rights to go mine this thing before Cage got it, correct?
Right.
Yep.
Yeah.
However, then Cage knew about that and basically bought the company out. However, that smaller company, through a series of, not necessarily backwater, but tried to then hide that, knowing that they couldn't not sell out to Cage, right?
Right.
But if they could basically change hands on some key property before the buyout,
They could still
and then
retain control.
basically step like sell that company, but then step back into a separate company. Where then if they basically downgrade or put on the books that certain properties are just like kind of fluff or garbage properties, they sold off to, I don't know,
Right. Right.
different, smaller companies, different,
Right.
universities, for different grants or something like that. Then they could hide that under a different company that then in this case has the grants to go do all the scientific research. Now it's this university project, as it would seem, under this
Oh, I see.
smaller research corporation,
Yeah, I see
which
what
is
you're saying.
basically them. However, of course, Cage catches wind of that and through his spies follows them to the planet as they're basically sold out, relocated. However, whatever fight ensues, they cut the communications after a certain point once they get found out, and cut it off so they can't either one get a hold of Cage. And so now you have some of, let's say, Cage's agents and their
Stuck.
descendants stuck there with them.
Right.
Maybe some of them aren't revealed because let's say they haven't blown their cover, but whatever happened had, let's say, cut them off. And so now you have this auditor who then, now this like defunct company was bought out by the Cage Corporation because let's say the great grandkid looks at it and goes, "Oh, there's this old note that this was an extremely important property that Grandpa Cage wanted to buy. That was like on the top priority, but it looks like, according to the books, like this dumb piece of property that disappeared." And then maybe like they're obviously because of what happened, some it seems shady, and so the auditor gets sent out to inspect what happened, go there, see what the property actually is, because if you like look at the unscrubbed books, you can see that like its value is kind of scrubbed and readjusted.
Right. Just a lot of corporate espionage stuff.
Right. And so an auditor would be sent out to be like, okay, what's the real value of this property? Why haven't we heard anything from it for 90 years? And, if you really look back in some like almost on logs that, you might not be able to see, it looked like it was an interesting thing, that it was a huge thing for this other company, that they really wanted it for all this research. But then we never got research back, and no one's heard from that company for, nearly 100 years. Um,
Hence the
but then
author.
now it just looks like it's, garbage, but there was interest in it. But now it's like something happened. And so maybe that's where the auditor comes from to go
Yeah,
check out, what the fraudulent,
yeah.
happenings going on. Um,
I keep
but then
thinking,
also,
I keep thinking of the Dark Tower series. Seth, I know you haven't read this. This is going to be a bit of a spoiler for you, but read, you'd understand this, and our listeners will understand this if they've read it. Of what is the one right after Wizard and Glass? The Kala one.
Oh yeah.
Oh my goodness! But there's that one guy who counts all the children in the town and then tells the robots how many children there are.
Yeah.
You know, and his dad did it, and he does it, and he's already kind of started training his kid to do it.
Right.
And that's the way that he gets saved. That's not the way that he gets saved, but that's the way that his kids don't get taken.
Right.
And that's kind of what I'm thinking, is that there are people there who work for the Cage Corporation and they have never seen any benefit from it, but just been so impressed on this, that they in fact will help destroy communication arrays that people keep trying to build. You know,
Okay.
they'll
That answers part of that mystery.
yeah, people are trying to. They tried for years to get off of the planet. It's like I could have sworn, like my father said, I could have sworn that we had enough fuel to make it at least to a place where we could have picked up someone would have been could have picked up our distress beacon,
Yeah.
but like we could never make it out of the solar system. We'd always would run out of fuel. And the the hero hears these things, and the little part of him that understands espionage and understands sabotage keeps kind of thing lighting up. But it's not until he learns, because he doesn't know all this information about Cage that we know. It's he like sort of progressively learns all of these things, and then kind of speaker for the dead esque, like puts it all together
Mm-hmm.
and kind of presents them all with this information. Because he at first is very pro Cage Corporation. I mean, they're everything to him. They've given him everything. They've been good to him. And he goes out on this routine mission, and then like just through the exposure to all of these sort of subplots, realizes like realizes and understands that they're not valuable. They're not completely and totally infallible. They don't
Yeah.
know all.
Right.
Because at first he thinks and believes that they destroyed the communication arrays and they did this thing and they did this thing. And then he finds out about the priceless material and says, "Well, of course they did this thing. It's only through their own foolishness that they would sabotage their ships. They're just waiting, whatever." Just all of these, when you're brainwashed to believe a certain thing, if you hear anything contrary, it's really easy to just kind of dismiss it. It's very easy to do that, you know? And that is what it is at first until he starts to see the fact that it's the Cage Corporation, and maybe he is a cage. That could be part of it. I don't know.
Yeah.
Do you
like
think we?
maybe his what's
What's
that?
up? No, you go.
I was gonna say like maybe his mother was a cage, because then that might have a conflict of interest.
Yeah,
But if the cage is pulling strings behind the back, they pull strings and get their right auditor to be sent. That
right,
they think might be in their pocket that has some connections, but might not look right on paper that they're directly connected.
right, right. Or maybe he is descendant of the people who owned the original corporation, the smaller corporation that the Cage Corporation took over, and he has sort of washed himself of that name completely, because they were unsuccessful or whatever, and then kind of goes to this place and is just kind of constantly confronted. Because everyone who is part of this original voyage expedition are all friends and family and close, intimate allies, except for the cage people of that corporation. You
Yeah.
know, they were a small mom and pop shop, you
Right.
know?
Yeah.
So like there's pictures of his great grandparents in everyone's thing. You know, everyone,
Yeah.
and so he's just kind of like coming in there all cool, and then he constantly sees these things in front of him and has to sort of question what's going on, you know?
Mhm.
I think one possible answer for that. Now, I doubt that you guys have seen it. Is it's kind of a weird, obscure one, but putting that part together, I don't know if it was on Nickelodeon or it was like one of those things, but it was like a little kid show called El Tigre.
I've heard of it, but I've never seen it. No.
Okay, so the idea is like they're superheroes, right? But his dad's like the big superhero, but his grandpa's like a retired ex supervillain.
Okay,
And
yeah.
so, but they all live together, and so he's always kind of getting like a half and half um, influence from his grandpa or his dad. So in
Right.
this case, kind of like the same idea is perhaps his grandfather backed out. He's like the black sheep of the family, backed out and was like a proponent of selling out to Cage and was instrumental in making that happen. Right. And so maybe
Right.
not in like a villainous way, but like growing up, his grandpa would be like, well, like, they're like the biggest corporation on the block and they've succeeded because, they take care of their own and they,
Right.
dot all their I's and cross all their T's. And,
Right.
the benefits of being part of a bigger, thing, they're able to pay for the best scientists. So they're cutting edge. And so if you can get a leg into this thing, better to have a leg in something that's going somewhere than something that'll just, the mom and pop thing that'll go down the drain.
Right.
Whereas then maybe his father kind of grows up and sees that and has, kind of on the opposite end, kind of resents that, maybe not having seen it, resents that, thinking like, oh, we could have done something, but, kind of resented his father for selling out to Cage. And maybe that's what put him as then with the father stepping out and now then the son, who's now the auditor, the father then, let's say, directed his part of the family to being, let's say, I guess you could say government,
Right.
so it was like neither one, but then he has some, as far as the auditor goes, has some influence from his grandpa on the one side that, might have some of the benefits or see some of like express some of the good seeming things from Cage, but he's the black sheep of the family. So maybe like on the asteroid or the planet, when people find out that he's, that's who he is, there's some people that might have a resentment towards him because,
Right.
he's the one that sold out. Um,
So just like a complex mix of politics.
yeah.
Yeah. I kind of like that. And here he is kind of at the heart of it, you know, and what he decides to do once he figures it out is going to be up to him, you know. He can choose to incorporate and sort of take it over. He can choose to fight the cage. He can choose to join them, you know. Um should we go one more episode with this, you guys think? As sort of a wrapping up?
Yeah, sure. Give
Yeah,
it
it'd
an
be fun to
ending.
see.
Okay. Great. I think that'd be a good idea. I feel like we're like right on the cusp of being able to close it out, but I think that with three more story elements, we'll be able to really sort of wrap it up in a way that'll be good.
Yeah. I'm interested. There's another social movement that has been afoot for a while, and that's the settlers.
Right.
A group of, hey, we're on our own, and they're just like, hey, I'm going to carve myself out my own little kingdom here. This is
Right.
an untouched world. I'm going to go someplace where, you know, I'm a rancher. I'm going to, find myself a valley and set up shop, and
Right.
you know, rugged individualists and stuff.
Right.
Like, and screw the corporation. What do they have to do with us anymore?
Right.
So,
Ladies and gentlemen, thank you so much for joining us for this episode of Wait It Gets Better. If you like this episode, let me know. At me on Twitter at @GetsBettercast or send me an email at waititgetsbettercast@gmail.com. If you didn't like this episode, I would say just wait. It gets better.